Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm super excited about today's video because I'm sharing with you my very first collaboration on YouTube. And I collaborated with T from Crumpets Tea and Sewing. Together we worked on McCall's 7992, which is this cute little dress with a tie. So there's 3 different views, and I'll be showing you that in a minute on my computer. We'll go and look at the pattern. But I made view A. And so the whole point of our collaboration was to show you that even though a pattern calls for woven, that sometimes you can get away with using a knit fabric. So T made hers in a really nice crepe rayon. It's a leopard print, and it's really just absolutely stunning. So when you're done with this video, go over there and check hers out because her dress came out just so good. So mine is actually with a knit. It's an ITY knit. Now the pattern calls for crepe, challis, charmeuse, or cotton blends. So really you want something that drapes really well. And ITY knits do drape really well. But you do need to take into consideration the stretch. And when we review the pattern, I'll tell you how I took that into consideration. So if you want to use a knit for a pattern that calls for a woven, you really just need to think about how the fabrics behave that the pattern calls for. So if it calls for a crepe, how does a crepe behave? How does a crepe fall? Does it have a lot of drape? So think about the knit that you're working with. In my case, the ITY has a lot of drape. So it would work well with the silhouette of the dress and how it's supposed to hang. So the next thing you want to think about is sizing. You might have a little bit more room to play with if you're sewing a knit because the knits stretch. So think about the fit of the garment. Is it supposed to be, really tight? Is it really fitted? Is it loose fitting? And then you're going to think about what size you need to cut. So for me, it's fitted, but it's got a little bit of extra fabric right here, right? Because it's a tad bit loose. So I cut a small. Had I cut a medium, I'd have a lot more here. But I was able to get away with a small, whereas if I were sewing this in a woven, I would have had to cut a medium. Because of the stretch of the fabric. I was also able to get away with things like not using facings because I was using a knit. So this dress that I'm wearing, View A, it's got the 3/4 sleeves with the gathering here. It's got the really cute tie. So this is a all-in-one piece, the collar, and then it turns into the tie. So you sew that up as one, and then you attach it to the neckline. I did notice though that this collar piece, you really had to kind of stretch it to make it fit the neckline. And because I was working with a knit, I didn't have to struggle too much. I also was able to get away with using only 2 yards of fabric. Normally for a small it calls for 60-inch fabrics 2 1/4. That's because you have to cut this tie on the bias if you're using a woven, so you can get that stretch in the fabric to make it fit the neck piece. I didn't need to cut my tie on the bias because I'm using a knit and it's already got stretch in it. So I was able to get away with only 2 yards. But I did see that trying to fit this collar piece on was a little bit tricky, but it was easier for me because I'm using a knit. So I know that T's going to touch on that in her review, and so she'll be able to talk more about what struggles she had, if any, fitting this collar onto the neckline. This dress, though, is just so comfortable in this ITY. It is just wonderfully, just super easy to wear, super comfortable. I wear it as a dress because it's a dress with heels. I wore it to work the other day. But one thing that you can do, especially if I had, I lengthened this, by the way, 2 inches. If I hadn't lengthened it, it would be more like kind of like a tunic type, so you could match it with leggings and some boots. I think that's another great thing to do with this pattern. The fuller length dresses, views B and C with the ruffle at the bottom, and as I mentioned, T made view C. It's gorgeous dress, and I'm planning to make view C in the future, and then view B would be great for summer. View C is better for fall. But yeah, I chose view C because I thought that, well, it's perfect time for fall. But yeah, so let's go ahead and pop over to my computer and I could kind of talk you through the pattern.
Okay, so here we have the pattern and we're looking at it online so we can have a nice clear view of it. So the view that I made is this one, which is view A, and I'm just scrolling down to the line art so we can look at that first. And as you can see, it's got the necktie, it's got 3/4 length sleeves with some gathering right there. And it's got a gathered waistline. There's some elastic in there. You're supposed to use bias binding to make a casing. And there's the view Tia made, which is view C. I'm going to make that view next, this time with woven. But let's talk about this view, this super cute dress. So as I mentioned, I made up view A, and I used this black Charisse Venezia ITY knit, and I got it at So English, and it happens to be on sale right now for only $6.99 a yard. So it's really, really slinky, as it says right here. It's a dressy knit, and it's 96% poly, 4% spandex. It's very lightweight, this is true, and it has a 4-way stretch. It says it's great for flowy tops and dresses, and that's why I chose an ITY. I felt that the flowiness would lend itself well to this pattern, being that this pattern calls for a challis, crepe, charmeuse, and cotton blends. So I really wanted something that was going to drape quite nicely with my knit. So the pattern, let's go back to the pattern real quick. The pattern has 5 pieces. So it's got a center front, a center back, 2 facings, and a collar/tie piece. I cut out a small, and we can go down here and look at the small measurements. So a small is for sizes 8 through 10. Normally when I'm working with a woven, I'm cutting a size 12. But since I was using a knit that had a lot of stretch, I thought I could get away with a size small, and that was totally fine. I did. It worked out well. Now I did have to make a couple of alterations just for better fit. Now I would have done this anyway had I been working with a woven. I lengthened my skirt 2 inches. And because I was working with a knit, I wanted my sleeves to be a little bit tighter around my arms. When I used just the regular pattern pieces without any alterations, they were a bit loose, and I felt it would look better given that I had a knit if they were tighter around my arm. And so I took them in on the underarm seam about maybe 2 inches, I believe. Yep, I took them in 1 inch on each side. So that's 2 inches. And I like the way that looked better. Now, I feel like I could have gone a little bit more given that I had a knit, but I didn't do that. And I still really like how it looks. Another thing that I would do personally is I would increase the amount of ruching or gathering actually on this sleeve. So I would probably take it up another inch or so. So when you're gathering, you gather up to a certain point. I'd probably gather a little bit more. And one, because the sleeves end at my elbow and I want them to be a little bit higher. And I also like the effect of gathering, so that's one thing that I would do differently. Another thing I did differently is there is a facing required, so a back neck facing and a front neck facing. Because I was working with a knit, I just serged that neckline and I folded it over 5/8 of an inch, and I stitched it. I did not use the facing. I didn't think it was necessary given I was working with a knit. The other thing I did differently from the pattern instructions was, instead of using the bias binding to create a casing for my elastic, I just sewed the elastic directly onto the waistline. Now, I got a dress a few months ago from H&M where they did that. The elastic was exposed, and I didn't mind that, and I just felt it was easier. Maybe I was just being lazy. And the elastic doesn't itch me. It's perfectly fine. And I just felt that it was an easier thing for me to do, was to just stitch it directly onto the line. So when you prepare your pattern pieces, they require you to draw a line right here. And I just followed that line and stitched my elastic, making sure that the elastic was stretched evenly around that waist. So I'm going to go back real quick to the fabric. This fabric was actually quite easy to work with in terms of cutting and putting it together and sewing. It got tricky when I went to the machine. It wanted to get stuck down into my throat plate. So one thing you can do, there's a couple things you do when that happens, and you can start your stitch line a little bit in the seam. Don't stitch it like right on the edge. That way the edge won't get stuck down into the throat plate. You could also put a piece of tissue paper underneath the fabric as you sew. But what I did differently was just change my throat plate out. So I used my narrow throat plate, and that really helped prevent that fabric from getting stuck down in there. So if you have that option, try that. It worked well. When I was stitching, I did use a zigzag stitch on my machine, and then I finished the edges on the serger. I don't like to just go serge directly on my seams. I just don't have that confidence quite yet with my serger. I prefer to first stitch with my regular sewing machine and then finish the edges with my serger. But other than that, those are the only things I did differently, being that I was sewing with the knit.
So thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you liked this collaboration. T and I will be working on something for the winter, so please stay tuned for that. So if you want to see it, make sure you're subscribed to both of our channels. So if you're not already subscribed to mine, please consider doing so, and I'm going to link T's channel below and in this video, so be sure to check her out. And let me know what you think, and if you like our makes. Thank you so much for watching.